Hi, this is Nathan Pierce again for another episode of REDtalks. I'm here with my manager and mascot, Bella the Wonder Dog. Say hello, Bella. And with me this week, we're going to talk about automating the creation and destruction of labs that has become very important for engineers these days, because you need to spin up environments and test things. And there are so many different variations of environments now that it becomes difficult. I mean, the lead time of building out something just to see if a feature works in a new release can be quite cumbersome. And being able to do that really quickly is increasingly important. So I have someone to show us how that works, someone who's doing really great work in that area, and it's Joel King from WWT. Joel, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing today, Nathan?
I'm doing very well. It's kind of weird having my boss watch me through this. I'm a little bit nervous today. She's really strict. So yeah, let's just, well, we've bored her already. Okay, so let's just get on to this. You've been working with Vagrant for the purposes I just explained, for being able to kind of spin up these environments. Sort of, what drove you to look to solve those problems? I mean, it was just taking too long to build these things out?
Yes, certainly that's one case. You know, one of the challenges that we have identified at Worldwide is teaching programmability concepts to network engineers. They don't have a good handle on virtualization techniques. So, and many of them aren't system admins either. So we're looking at ways that we can enable environments so that when we do training and education, whether it be F5 or whether it be networking gear, that we can bring up in a programmatic environment very quickly with just a few commands. So we're trying to take the hurdle of being a sysadmin away, or remove that barrier away from getting into learning about network programmability and programmability in general. And Vagrant's a good way to do that.
I'm glad you mentioned it that way. I'll be honest, there's been technologies I've tried to look at, and if I haven't got it working in a certain amount of hours or maybe days, I'll give up. Mm-hmm. And that might have been revolutionary, like me working out and getting all that together. But if I can't get it running, then that deters me very quickly. And maybe I was so close to getting there, but I didn't know it. Someone being able to provide me the environment so I can just get in and start learning the tool and understanding the value straight up, that's hugely valuable with how busy people are today, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing that we'd like to use Vagrant for is with our training classes. So we have environments that we configure for F5 training, and the students there for a day, they go through a lot of exercises, and to be able to give them a single file, a single Vagrant configuration file to take along home with them so that they can take the concepts that they may have learned in our Advanced Technology Center in a training class, that they can use it back in their environment as well, is a hugely valuable to be able to reinforce those things that they were taught in class.
That's important, because what we need more of these days, especially with this evolution from mode 1 to mode 2 architectures, is not just demonstrations. We need to be focused also on enablement. Just showing something to someone doesn't mean they're going to be able to go back to their office and work it out when it's a new technology they're not familiar with, but enabling them to take something away and have them run an environment. I mean, that is hugely powerful. So I appreciate you joining us today to kind of explain some of this, and even, if we're lucky, see how it works. So now you had a couple of diagrams. You can sort of show where Vagrant fits for those who are a little less familiar with how Vagrant works. Are you able to bring those up?
Sure. Let me share my screen here.
Okay.
And I'll bring up a slide deck here. Let me just share. Let me know when you can see that.
Yep, I can see that. Good.
So this is really in a concise format here. This is the components of Vagrant. So Vagrant is from a company called HashiCorp, and its goal is to create a disposable VM environment. Primarily, we're going to use it on VirtualBox. It does have plugins for other virtualization environments, but for our use case in training and education, we want to be able to run everything off the laptop. So in order for a student to consume Vagrant in a virtual environment, they're going to have a laptop they're going to have Oracle VirtualBox installed on it, and they'll have Vagrant installed on it. And what Vagrant does is it really manages that configuration, the building and the destruction of virtual machines in the VirtualBox environment. So it gives you the ability to spin up a virtual machine from a simple configuration file. And then once that machine is set up, you can provision it. So what I'm going to show you here today is provisioning using a shell, but you could also use other provisioning tools like Ansible to customize that configuration after that VM is instantiated. So in this case, in many cases, people sometimes will create an OVA file or whatever for communicating, a virtual machine environment. They're really big and heavy files, right? They're very large.
Yeah.
But Vagrant does all this from a very simple text-based configuration file. So the footprint of that is very small. And you can run it, on Windows or on a Mac environment. But this provisioning step is very important, because what we're going to do after we bring up that machine is be able to configure that environment for the user, so that they don't have to be a sysadmin, and they essentially can get all of the dependencies, all of the code, all of the prerequisites, if you will, for that environment, so that we can go out and get them focused on the task at hand without having to learn a lot of sysadmin type commands and tool sets to be able to bring up an environment. So let me just hop out here. It takes a minute or two to do this, to bring up the environment. But essentially what I'm going to do here, and let me just readjust my size of my screen here a little bit. But basically what I have in this environment is I have a directory that has a Vagrant file in that directory, and simply you can run a command Vagrant up to be able to bring up that particular virtual machine environment. And it takes a few minutes because it has to download some dependencies. But let's let that run, and I'm gonna hop back here at this point, and we'll go out and take a look at some of the use cases that you might use this for. So when we were at our virtual team meeting earlier this month, I presented these concepts, and people say, well, how is that relevant to a network engineer? Why would you do this? Well, here's 3 use cases that we've enabled for this type of virtual environment just in the past month or two. So Cisco's ACI has a online repository for a variety of Python SDKs, and also sample files and sample utilities, with the purposes of enabling people's understanding of the programmatic interfaces of Cisco's ACI. And the other week I took a look at it, and I realized that they had a Vagrant file out in their Git repository that you could use the Vagrant up command against it, which will bring in all of the SDKs and configuration that you would need to be able to use some of these examples and learn programmatic techniques against an ACI fabric. The other use case that we found is as you know, Mark Wall, colleague of mine, won the iControl June programmability contest with his F5 initial setup Ansible configuration. And we've had some other folks in the industry interested in that and want to use that. One of the challenges that they had is they weren't a system admin, so they made some mistakes and didn't quite follow the instructions properly on how to set that environment up. So to eliminate that problem, I created a Vagrant file, which is what we're running here today, that brings up Mark's environment, loads all of the dependencies, loads the F5 Python SDK, and then goes through and has downloads all of the files from Mark's GitHub repository, so that someone can follow along with those exercises of doing the initial F5 setup. And the last use case that we ran into is recently I've been validating the Ansible modules for Palo Alto networks, and we had some difficulty or some problems with the version of code that was supplied, and we wanted to verify all that. And we went back and forth with the engineers from Palo, and they said, "Well, what version of Ansible are you running? What version of our module are you running? What version of the Palo Alto appliance you're running?" You know, all this back and forth. And finally, I thought, well, I just create a Vagrant file that brings up my environment that I'm using to test against that particular firewall, provide it to those engineers, and then we were able to very quickly rule out the fact that it wasn't my version of Ansible, it wasn't the version of modules, it wasn't anything about it. It ended up being an issue with the firewall. We rebooted it, everything came up and running. So the whole idea of being able to provide as you said, a ephemeral, a temporary environment that is exactly the same, whether it's on my laptop or your laptop, to be able to collaborate with people over distances in debugging problems, or in the case of training, to be able to provide an environment to a student that has just, you know, been in an 8-hour class, to take it home and be able to use it in their own environment is huge.
I like the way you explain that there, Joel, because I can give a recent experience of my own where I signed up for an evaluation of some orchestration software, and they provided me a gzip tub or the tgz file and a list of the distributions that they'd tested that particular version against. Now, the problem was those distributions were ones that I was not familiar with. So I had to go through the process of familiarizing myself with how they install packages and their dependency systems. And it was not my normal, more familiar systems that I was working on a lot. So it actually burned like 2 days that I could have got back if I'd just been provided a means to actually creating an environment like through Vagrant. Then I could have been up and running in very, like, minutes, and actually learning how their software works, instead of messing around with my entire environment and being a sysadmin forced to suddenly learn a new system that I didn't know.
Right, right. So in our provisioning step here, it looks like I had maybe a network timeout on it. I'm going to run that provisioning step again here on it. Obviously, when you initiate these Vagrant files, there are a number of dependencies. Like you may have to connect up to, in this case, Ubuntu's domain, or you may need to connect up to GitHub or whatever. So sometimes you might have issues with connectivity, but it's pretty easy to go back and resolve that. So once we have our environment set up and the Vagrant provisioning is complete, it's fairly easy to get in that environment. So in this case, you can see I just did a Vagrant SSH. So in this case, I'm now SSH into that virtual machine running on VirtualBox. Mm-hmm. And if I just take a look, you see there's my F5 toolkit. So I can CD into my F5 toolkit, and you can see that I have Ansible installed. And if you take a look at this environment, what we have here is Mark's F5 initial setup file. And in this case, this is, you know, all of the steps that he developed to be able to automate that provisioning of a pair of F5 devices from that playbook, from that Ansible playbook file. So all of the environment that we need to be able to have somebody consume that is right here. They don't need to understand the playbook. They just need to know it's there. They need to know how to run it. And Mark also has a sample configuration file, which essentially is a CSV file that he uses as input in order to configure these devices. So all that the engineer would need to do, it would be to be able to edit this file change the values in it and can use that as a guideline. So really what we've provided here is really a self-contained, entirely self-contained system. You can see we have Ansible installed. It's at the latest release. It's at 2.2.0, so it's current. It's not back leveled. And we have our configuration file here that's been modified. And then we also have some local modules that we've developed for these playbooks that are automatically loaded into the appropriate search path, for this demonstration. So really everything's all there and ready to go.
So that's I like that, because it's not just a case, like you said earlier, of downloading the virtual machine. It's not like you just brought down an OVA file and spun it up, because, well, anyone can click a download link and then go make a coffee and it's finished downloading. It's all those steps after, setting up that environment like you showed in the diagram at the beginning, and then putting the Ansible install in, and then putting all of the playbooks in, and then configuring that environment, and all of those steps after. That's what takes time. And that's time you can't be doing something else. So that's the bit that Vagrant brings on top of all of that, isn't it? It's that post-download of the OVA configuration that goes on that's really important.
Right, and it's self-documenting. If you think about downloading an OVA file, you don't know what steps the person did to be able to create that environment. And the OVA files are very large, right? Sometimes it might take them a long period of time to download. In this case, it's really self-documenting, because that Vagrant file shows the end user all of the steps that the person that developed that Vagrant file used, all of the dependencies that they used to create that environment. So it is the fact that you have a text-based file, the fact that it uses VirtualBox, uses a very widely known, broadly available environment, and it has a very simple configuration file that describes all of the steps that are leading up to that, makes it very useful.
No, that's great. And I like that you said before that you use it yourself actually to build an environment to share with your own engineers so that they could see how something works. Like I think it was when you mentioned the Palo Alto Networks environment, you shared it with a group of engineers, but you were able just to share the Vagrant file, and then they could go and then build that, instead of having to somehow take your entire lab, the entire configuration of your environment variable, or even give someone access to your lab, which can be difficult. My lab is a repurposed 6-year-old Mac Mini sitting in the corner that I managed to get 16 gig of RAM in. I can't give anyone access to that, and I can't zip all the VMs and my VMware Fusion configuration files and get that to someone in a reasonable amount of time and get them back up and running. It's just not feasible. But at the same time, I need to share what I've done and convey those ideas. So I think what you've demonstrated and what you've explained is excellent. And for people who have been working like primarily in just infrastructure environments where they buy their production equipment, but then they also have lab versions of the same equipment so that they can test things. Well, that was fine when it was fairly finite configurations. But now that we're doing integrations and automation, and we've got Ansible in play, and we've got all these other systems that need to connect in, well, the environment changes, and you need to be able to spin an environment up, test, and then destroy and put those resources back into the next lab environment, which might be run by another Vagrant file and setup. So I think it's great to be more agile in these sharing of systems, and especially for evaluation and test purposes.
Yeah, virtualization, that's one of the key factors of where the industry's transitioning to around software-defined everything, and also software-defined, specifically software-defined networking, is that really networks of the future are going to be developed using virtualization technologies and Ethernet. Those are the two things that won. So whether you have a physical appliance, a physical switch, or a virtual switch, really there's no difference if they're all configured through an API. You use the same techniques, the same configuration, whether it is a application delivery controller that's in a virtual environment or in a physical environment. It doesn't matter. And the whole concept of being able to move these devices into cloud environments or private cloud environments and be able to interact with them the same way that we've done with physical hardware really gives us a lot of agility.
That's a good point that you mentioned networking. I remember when I first looked at Open Daylight, which is the open source controller using OpenFlow to manage and configure SDN switches. I was absolutely amazed that using Open Daylight and Mininet, the switch virtualization software, I could build I built an each switch network and configured up which paths, flows ran through which switches across the network, and could do any of that via a CLI. And it was all entirely software. I was managing the whole thing. I could tear down switches because there was software, and then repurpose the same configuration off of another branch and another leaf in the environment. So yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. I mean, it all software driven, but it was through using, it wasn't exactly Vagrant, but the same concept. I could take a configuration file, I could delete it, I could create a whole new environment, and then switch back to my previous environment just by pushing that file back in. That's pretty amazing, and we're all being driven to think more like that, because you can't then go and say, I'm going to reconfigure my lab and literally start wheeling racks back in to the right location and connecting them up. Like, that's just too slow these days for businesses to be able to be, responding quick enough to developing new architectures and testing them. So I really appreciate the sentiment you shared there. I agree. I mean, that's pretty important way moving forward of that level of spin up, spin down, move on to the next job as quick as you can.
Right. Well, it's been great talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks again, Joel, for coming back. This is the second time you've been on. I didn't mention that earlier. I really appreciated our last chat as well. And yeah, hopefully we'll have another cool thing to demonstrate sometime in the near future.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Nathan.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. You've been listening to Joel King from WWT, that's that guy, and Nathan Pierce from F5 Networks. This has been another episode of Red Talks. Thanks for listening.